This is the first scene you're probably going to see when you start up Director right here. And this is going to ask you what controller you're looking for, planning to use. I'm going to use the Flex Max. That's the one we use the most. And down here you can set how many outputs it has. We're going to do all of them, 16. We're gonna make these dimmable just for fun, and we're gonna use servos, so that way you can just kind of see all of that. And then we're gonna title this New Show. You can title that whatever you want, obviously. Boom. And now this is your main interface. One of the things I highly encourage you to do as soon as you start is to click settings, just like that. This flies out your show and scene settings here. All right. Scene settings will look like this until you grab this little red dot with your mouse and pull it out like this. I find if you're using just empty scenes that are going to loop, 10 seconds is fine. And so now this is where you will do all of your interacting here. When you take your mouse and click inside of this, you'll get a blue little bar, as long as this is highlighted down here. This is your edit mode right here. And so you'll see that there's a tooltip that tells you some different stuff about it. I generally just leave it in this mode so I can do this like that. But we don't have to worry about that right now. So start off with show settings right here. Now, anything you have an issue remembering what it does, or if you're curious what it does, the biggest thing you can do is go down here to help, and the help window will just pretty much tell you what everything does. And it's good to familiarize yourself with all this stuff, even if you never use it. There's a number of things that we never use. And like a good example is the input one timer. We've never used that for anything. Startup delay we've used because this is generally if you have some sort of PIR, passive infrared motion sensor that needs to quote unquote warm up. So you would put in like, a minute, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever, that will allow the sensor to warm up and not give you false triggers, right? So there's that. Now, let's take a look here at normally closed inputs, single shot inputs, and normally closed outputs, like this. Normally closed inputs is if you have, like let's say a reed switch or a micro switch attached to a door, and when the door is closed, it's basically telling the switch to be on, right? So if this is not checked, that means that it'll basically think it's triggering. It'll say, hey, this button is being pressed, we need to do something. But what will happen is if you click this, it knows that button is being pressed, and then when it is unpressed, or if the magnet moves away from the reed switch, then it activates the input. So just be aware if you're using normally closed inputs of some sort, or an input that is being closed constantly, you're going to want to use this here, okay? You've got single shot inputs, which basically mean they can only be triggered once per press. That way, if you have something that is constantly being pressed down upon or constantly being triggered, like an RFID, it won't keep looping with that as a button press. It'll just see it as one press. So like this, button is pressed, and I'm holding it down, the scene or the effect won't keep triggering until I let off and push it again, okay? So that's what that does. And normally closed outputs, this is generally used when you want to have a light on all the time and then go off, or you have a MagLock being powered by your controller box. So let's see how that would kind of work. Over here, this is where all your outputs are. As you can see, they're all listed up here. And if I right click on this and rename it to MagLock, like that, now it knows that this output 1 is a MagLock. That way you know it. And what will happen is when this is clicked, that means that this is getting constant power all the time until you interrupt it by doing something like this. Okay, so that's more or less how that works. So you can also, again, do the same thing here. Let's say this is an LED that you want to have turn on when something happens, okay? So that's what normally closed outputs is for. It's for applying constant pressure, so applying constant power to this. So now with this, that means this LED would be on the whole time, right? Until something made it turn off. So there you go. Also, you'll notice when the program starts up that you have this drop-down menu here. that starts at input 1, you generally want to go immediately to Ambient Scene, because this is where you start. This is your starting scene that is looking for triggers and things like that. So also just kind of set up your Ambient Scene pretty much at the start. That's the first thing I tend to do, right? So, and then we'll go over all of this here in a little bit when we get to that section. So going back over here to your show settings, here's your master volume. You can control the overall volume of the audio that comes out of your controller if it has audio. Obviously, you can increase the bass, adjust the treble, and do some other things here. Mute, disable. I've never used this, but you might have to. DMX is something you shouldn't have to mess with unless you were doing something with DMX, and that's something we'll cover in a later video. And then down here you have servos. And if your servos are standard servos that go from 0 to 90 degrees, you won't have to worry about this. If your servos go from 0 to 180, then you're going to want to do this to get the full range out of your servo here. And you'll notice when I hover over some of these boxes, you get a tooltip that pops up that tells you what they do. This is another way to kind of tell you what is happening with each one of these. So just be aware that you don't have to click the help button every time. Sometimes you can just hover over stuff and it'll tell you what these items do. All right. Now we're going to jump over here to scene settings. The show settings is for everything. This is a global settings that affects every scene and your whole show. The scene settings are specific to each scene. So anything I change here will not affect what happens here. All right, just be aware of that. When you go to scene settings, you're going to notice there's a bunch of settings here. You have volume left and volume right. You can actually make this where only certain audio in one scene will play out of the left channel, and only certain audio will play out of the right channel in a different scene. So I've used that before. Fade on interrupt. Normally when you're having audio play here, up inside of this, and audio is something we'll cover in a different video because there's more to it than just adding audio, so that'll probably be one of our next couple videos after this. You'll notice that when you jump to a new scene, the audio just cuts off, just jumps without any fade. Well, this lets you choose a fade to go to the next scene. So you have your input, and then let's say you have a 3-second fade, the audio will fade out and then go into another scene. So it's not a jarring transition. Ambient resume. This, as you can see here, enable this if you'd like the ambient animation and audio to resume from where it left off. So let's say you have this is your ambient scene waiting for an input. You have your audio in here, and let's say that. Let's see here. I'm going to zoom out so I can get to a longer thing. So let's say 2 minutes now. We'll go to this. And by the way, you can also zoom in and out by holding down the control key on your keyboard and using your mouse wheel to scroll in and out as well. That's a little shortcut if you so choose to use it. But you can also just use these buttons here that you saw me using before. Zoom in, zoom out, zoom all. Okay. So what will happen is your audio is playing, and let's say a scene is triggered at 1 minute. It goes and plays that scene, but then it comes back to here. Well, if you don't want it to start over from here, it will pick up back up here. So you can set that for, again, it's similar to the transition. So it will pick back up at scene 1 when it comes back to this scene. All right. This is good for when you're wanting your audio when you have your audio doing something very specific and you need it to pick back up in a spot here, so nothing weird happens up in this area. Okay. Sound delay is to offset the start of the scene sound. So let's say your animation takes a few seconds to do something, you can delay it here like that. So sound mode. This is something I've never used, but if you want to know what each of those modes do, there's also a help button down here that will show you what those do. This just tells you default, no sound, continue ambient, play all files, jukebox mode. So these give you some extra options for things to do if you want. Fixed length here. Obviously, this is if you want your scene to have a fixed length, no matter what, recording will automatically stop when this point is reached. So this is another thing I've never used because I'm usually very specific about my timing and things like that, or my scenes match my audio. So I don't generally mess with this myself. All right, this is the most important area here, the behavior tab, if you will. This is where everything in your scene is going to happen. First thing I'm going to recommend to do is just uncheck every single one of these. I don't know why they start this way, but they do, so I generally just leave them unchecked. I come in and immediately uncheck them. So I'm going to explain what these two sections do, because this is where I find people run into a lot of confusion about the Director program. Okay, so interruptible by 1. So what this means is, if I check this, that means that input 1 that is hooked to your controller, if that button is pressed, it's going to jump to input 1 / scene 1. I tend to say scene, so if you hear me say scene 1, I mean input 1. I actually think these should be named scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, scene 4, but I didn't make the program, so it doesn't matter. So interruptible by 1 means you'll go to input 1 no matter what. If you input 2, we'll go to input 2, input 3. So these play these scenes, and if you're doing a very simple puzzle where, let's say, you have you basically press button 1 and you go to scene 1, something happens, and that's it. And if you don't have multiple scenes that need or multiple inputs, you can just do this. This is the most basic thing to do here. 1 means 1, 2 means 2. But let's say you need something to jump to. Let's say you have input 5 wired to do something different, right? So and you have let's say you have 1, 2, and 3. All right, inputs 1, 2, and 3. So that means these are going to jump to these. But let's say you have 1, 2, and 3. Input 1, 2, and 3. You need those to happen at the same time, and then jump to scene 5. All right, so let's say scene 5 over here is a success scene, right? So let's say scene 5 is where something happens, and your MagLock opens, and your LED comes on. All right, so that's without. And also, if I go into manage scenes, I can come down here and give it a custom name. Let's say this is my success scene. All right, so now when you drop down, you go, okay, success. All right. So let's say we've gone to ambient. Ambient is generally, I'm going to give this, I generally name this waiting, like this, because I know that this scene is waiting for something to happen. Okay? So now this is your waiting situation. So let's say you need input 1, 2, and 3 to do something. So I'm going to go to multi-input go-to. I'm going to go to success. You're going to get this pop-up window here that pops up twice for some reason. Don't know what's going on there. And you're going to mark 1, 2, 3. So this would be if you have, let's say, multiple RFIDs around the room, and you have to have some statues placed somewhere in particular. And only when all 3 are placed will this scene play. So you can place 2 of the statues, 1 of the statues. Nothing will happen until all 3. And of course, you just treat these all as buttons. Just imagine everything is a button. Read switch is a button, RFID is a button. Everything is basically a switch. All right, it's either on or it's off. So once all these are on, it says go to success. All right, and that means this will jump to success. Yay! Success has occurred. And you can tailor that. And a sound effect could play here. And let's say the sound effect is that long right there. Let's see how long is that? That is 5 seconds. Let's say your sound effect plays for 5 seconds. Your MagLock opens. Your LED comes on for 3 seconds. Oops, sorry, got a little out of control there. For 3 seconds, and you'll notice, by the way, with the further in you zoom, the more these little blocks appear. Well, each one of those is basically how it determines the timing on things. So you can zoom in to get a more fine timing on this. So I can zoom out, those go away, but the more you zoom in, the more control you have over precisely how much action happens here. Okay, so now that has occurred, and depending on how your scenes are set up, which we'll get to in a second, it'll go back to ambient, which is down here, or we'll go to another scene, another waiting scene, or something like it. So, but in this case, let's say it goes back to ambient, like that. Okay. So that is basically what interruptible by and multi-input go to, and that's how you trigger things to happen, such as that. You have this drop down where it says all selected inputs, and let's say you only need 2 of the selected inputs to do something. I will give a more specific example of this later. We'll come back to this. So, disable inputs. This means that at the end of the scene, let's say I wanted 1, 2, and 3 to not be able to be re-triggered. I don't want them to do anything. I don't want them to be able to mess with anything. I can disable these at the end of the scene being played. So in this situation, we would go to success, and I would say disable these, because what's going to happen is this happens at the end of the scene being played, right? So this will have success, inputs disable, you go back to waiting, and now these inputs cannot be re-triggered at all in any way, shape, or form. Now, one thing you're going to want to make sure you do is if, let's say, you have a reset scene or something like that, or you're going to want to re-enable those, unless you just reset your box, which I don't suggest. Just make sure that you re-enable those if they end up disabled. Okay, and the same thing here. You can disable your outputs and you can re-enable the inputs. Disable the outputs, re-enable the outputs. So that's what all these do. So this is, over here, like I said, we have this. This has disabled my inputs. And let's say I went back to waiting, and for some reason, I just wanted to have them re-enable. I don't know why, but that's what would happen. So now those would be re-enabled. I mean, that would be silly, but you get the idea. So that's what's going on there. And again, same with the outputs. So that's just at the end of the scene, they don't work anymore. So actually, in the case of a MagLock, right? So let's say at the end of the success scene, your MagLock has triggered, and let's say that you want the MagLock to stay triggered here like that. It opens, but at the end, you disable that output. Now that output, you don't have to worry about this in subsequent scenes, right? This goes back to this, and that means that MagLock is off until you hit like a reset scene. And generally, it's a good idea to have some sort of scene that resets everything. That way, nothing can get re-triggered and stuff like that, and the show flows smoothly. Okay. Other input go-to. Let's say this is usually the best way to initiate a fail scene, right? So let's say that somebody places the wrong statue here. Let's say there's an input 4, right? And input 4 triggers a fail scene. So if they were to place the wrong statue in a different spot, right, you can now tell it to go to let's say input 1, just randomly. And so let's say input 1 is our fail scene. So this would play a failure sound or light or something like that. So now this would go to here, and then you would have that go to at the end, which we're going to go into. Actually, this is a good thing. We'll go into this right now. Momentary is something I've never used. This is usually for haunted houses when you need a scene to play while something is being triggered. Again, not saying you won't use it, but that's basically what that is. It's a scene plays only while something is happening. Anyway, so now this is another important one here. This, I would say, after scene go-to and interruptible and multi-input go-to are your most important things to be acquainted with here. So after, let's say after your fail scene plays, it's going to go back to waiting, right? It'll be like, meh, and then goes back to here, which means it's waiting for something to happen. Now it's waiting for these 3 inputs to go to your success scene. Now, usually your ambient scene, you want it to be set to, after this scene, go to this scene. So this scene loops. It just, every 2 minutes, it goes back to the exact same scene, right? So let's say you've done your success scene here. Boom. Things are successful. Everything is done. And then you can have it go back to waiting. And what this means, ambient next scene, is it means that it's going to go to the next scene in the ambient list. I like to tell it to go to a very specific scene just in case something weird happens or I forget something. I just like to be very specific with where it's going. I'm not a huge fan of the next scene thing. If I have too many scenes, it gets very confusing. Down here is a special function. There's a bunch of different functions that you can have this do. Again, I find this tends to be more for the haunt industry stuff than escape rooms, but if you need to know what each one of them does, this is another time for you to go down into special function, and this will tell you what that stuff does. like that in the help area. Game timer. This is a newer function that has been instituted when a scene starts. It will keep a timer running in the background. This is a new thing that has been implemented for escape rooms specifically. And as you can see here, this is used to trigger a specific scene once a specific amount of time has elapsed. Okay, so let's see. Let's say after 60 minutes, right? After that 60 minutes, no matter what happens, like right now, like this would, let's say that this, and actually this would not be here in the success scene. This is actually not the place to run that. This would be in your ambient scene when your show starts, right? So let's say you have a show starting thing. You have a button that tells you to start the show, or when the thing boots up. That means this game timer will now start. And at the end of everything, let's say after 60 minutes of everything happening, you tell it to go to input 1, which is a fail scene, right? Or you would have in this, let's do this here. Well, actually, this will make more sense. This will be a game over scene. Okay, so that would be game over. And so now this would be the end of your game. And so you go into here. So after 60 minutes, boom, input 6 plays your game over scene, right? So that is what the game timer is for. So that's a handy little thing. Now, obviously, you can use it to other stuff. Like let's say if you have your success, now the players have 5 minutes to do something else, or they end up failing. They go to a fail scene or something like that, right? They have this is good. Like let's say you have a bomb of some sort, like that you can't control kind of when it starts. That's like you get to a scene, and all of a sudden there's a bomb they have to defuse, and they have 5 minutes to defuse it before things go haywire, right? Now, obviously, yeah, you can have a timer built into that prop, which triggers something here, but you get the idea. Let's say this facility will self-destruct in so many minutes, you know. They have 10 minutes to do something before something happens. So there's this can be used for things other than just the full 60-minute game timer, just so you know. So that's the basics of the scene settings, and of course you can hit this button to reset everything to default. I don't think I've ever used it, but we'll do it now, just so I say I've used it. That's default, apparently. There you go. It's kind of an undo thing, I guess, but so now it's all been set to default. So the final thing I'm going to go over in this video here is your scenes, your inputs. So you'll notice when I go to Manage Scenes, I have been adding names to this, and so I know what each one of these inputs is. Now, these are not the only scenes/inputs you are limited to. You'll notice there's these 2 buttons here, Insert Above, Add Below. So let's say I wanted to add another ambient scene, right? So let's say this ambient scene is just waiting. And now I would have game start, right? So this would be the game start scene. And now this would be ambient 1 here. And if I did that here, if I added something below this, I would have input 1, 1, like that. You can have a lot of scenes. You can have, I think, something like 70 plus scenes inside of here. I've never made that many. I have made a lot. I have probably made like 40 scenes in a puzzle before, but that was a very involved puzzle. But this this guy here, this lets you add all these scenes. Now be aware, once you've written your scene, let's say you have to go in and add another one. Like let's say everything is fleshed out and ready to go. If you add a new scene that you didn't know you need, it might shift some things around, and it might change some of your things here. Like anything with the drop down, your after scene go to, your other input go to, and even possibly this will get shifted. So make sure everything is how you want it to be. And a good way to do that is up here at the top in the scene summary. This is a newer function as well that was added like in the last year. It tells you what this scene is doing. So this scene will play when it ends. The scene ambient next will be played next. So, but if I go to waiting, it'll say, oh, when scene ambient 0 waiting will be played next. So this tells you what each scene does. So that way you can kind of double check. You can go through your scenes and be like, oh, something has shifted. That's not right. The other way to tell this is this outline, which is also a new thing here. You click this, it basically gives you kind of a flow chart of what your whole show is doing, what every scene is doing, what your game is doing. So you'll notice here, Ambient 0, it says show starts here. Before the scene starts playing, the game timer is set to 60 minutes, and it'll jump to this, right? So that was done there, which I believe, I thought we turned that off. Oh, no, we didn't. Okay, so I'm just turning that off for now. That would actually probably, see, that's something that we're here would be smarter in the game start. Once the game starts, this scene would go to this scene, and then this would start your timer, and then that would play your game over thing like that. But in the outline, you'll notice all of that just got changed. So no longer is the timer here. No scenes to trigger. If inputs 1, 2, and 3 are all triggered together, this will start. If any inputs are triggered, this will fail. So if any of these other ones are triggered. And then down here, game start. Before the scene starts playing, the game timer starts to go while the animation is playing. So this is really handy. I'm glad this was added. This is a great step forward, especially for escape rooms. This just tells you at a glance what your show is doing. So there is that. That's pretty much the basics of what everything does here. Like I said, we're going to go into more details about other things. We'll go into details about how to make your lights dimming if you want dimmable stuff. Same thing with servos, how you want your servos to behave with these little waves and everything like that. And also more about the music here, as well as other options and more involved things. So hopefully that will help you guys get started. And if you have any questions, let us know.